The morning sun painted long shadows across Creekside, Arizona, a town so small you could drive through it in 3 minutes if you didn't stop at the single traffic light. Population 1,847, according to the faded sign at the town limits. The kind of place where everybody knew everybody, and strangers were noticed before their cars even stopped rolling. Major Sarah Chen sat in the corner booth at Betty's diner, the same booth she'd claimed every Saturday morning for the past 6 weeks. She liked the corner. It gave her a clear view of the door and kept her back to the wall, old habits from 20 years in the Air Force. Some things you never unlearned. Betty herself shuffled over with the coffee pot, her gray hair pulled back in the same tight bun she'd probably worn for 40 years. "You want the usual, hun?" "Yes, ma'am, thank you." Betty nodded and headed back toward the kitchen, and Sarah heard the whispers start up again from the booth behind her. She didn't have to turn around to know who it was. The same 3 men who showed up every Saturday like clockwork. Earl Hutchins, Tom Sawyer. Yes, that was actually his name, and Dale Morrison. All veterans, all in their 70s, all convinced they knew everything about military service. "Can't believe they're letting women fly combat missions now," Earl said, not bothering to lower his voice. "It ain't natural." "Damn shame is what it is," Tom agreed. "War's a man's business, always has been, always should be." Sarah stirred her coffee slowly, keeping her eyes forward. She'd heard it all before, not just from these 3, but from men throughout her career. The doubt, the dismissal, the casual disrespect wrapped up in words like sweetheart and little lady. Dale's voice carried across the diner. "You hear about that A-10 pilot they got coming to town next week for that memorial dedication?" "Yeah, some big-shot hero," Earl said with a snort. "Probably another pencil pusher who never saw real combat." Sarah's jaw tightened, but she said nothing. She took a sip of her coffee and watched the steam rise from the cup. Outside the window, Main Street was starting to wake up. Old Mr. Peterson opening his hardware store. The Garcia kids riding their bikes toward the park. Normal life in a normal town. "I heard it's a woman," Tom said, and the other 2 went quiet for a moment. "A woman?" Earl's voice went up an octave. "Flying an A-10, those things are tough as nails. You need real strength to handle one." "Bet she never even saw combat," Dale added. "Probably just flew training missions and they gave her a medal for showing up." Sarah set her cup down carefully, very carefully, on the saucer. Her hand was steady. It was always steady. Even when her heart was pounding and her thoughts were screaming, her hands stayed steady. That's what made her a good pilot. Betty arrived with breakfast, scrambled eggs, wheat toast, no bacon. She set the plate down and gave Sarah a knowing look, then glanced toward the 3 men. "Some folks in this town need to learn when to shut their mouths," she said, loud enough for them to hear. "Now, Betty, we're just having a conversation," Earl called out. "Conversations don't need to be loud enough for the whole diner to hear," Betty shot back. She patted Sarah's shoulder and walked away. Sarah ate her breakfast slowly, mechanically. The eggs had no taste. Nothing had much taste anymore, not since Afghanistan, not since the day that changed everything. She finished eating, left a $20 bill on the table, twice what the meal cost, and stood up. As she walked past the 3 men's booth, Earl looked up at her and smiled, that condescending smile she'd seen 1,000 times. "Morning, miss," he said, tipping an imaginary hat. "You have a nice day now." "You too, sir," Sarah replied evenly and walked out into the Arizona sunshine. Her truck was parked across the street, a dusty Ford F-150 that had seen better days. She climbed in and sat for a moment, hands on the steering wheel, breathing slowly. In through the nose, out through the mouth, the way the therapist at the VA had taught her. The nightmares had been worse lately. Every night the same dream, the sky going silent, the radio dead, the sound of her own breathing inside the helmet, and then the voices screaming for help that she couldn't give. She started the truck and pulled out onto Main Street, heading toward the edge of town where she'd rented a small house. It wasn't much, 2 bedrooms, 1 bathroom, a kitchen that smelled like the previous tenant's cooking, but it was hers, private, quiet. The memorial dedication was in 5 days. 5 days until she had to stand in front of this town and accept an honor she didn't deserve. 5 days until everyone learned who she really was. The pilot who failed. The house was dark and cool when she got home. Sarah dropped her keys on the kitchen counter and walked through to the spare bedroom she'd converted into an office. The walls were bare except for one photograph, her squadron, taken 3 years ago at Bagram Airfield. 14 faces smiling at the camera, arms around each other's shoulders, young and confident and alive. 7 of them were dead now. Sarah sat down at the desk and opened her laptop. The email from General Martinez was still there, the one she'd read a dozen times but couldn't bring herself to delete. Major Chen, the town of Creekside has requested your presence for the dedication of a memorial honoring the service members from Mohave County. Given your exceptional service record and the Medal of Honor you received for actions in Afghanistan, they've specifically asked that you be the keynote speaker. I know you've been reluctant to make public appearances, but I believe this would be good for both you and the community. These small towns need to see the face of modern military service. They need to understand what our men and women in uniform are accomplishing. Please consider it. The ceremony is on November 10th. Respectfully, General Robert Martinez. Sarah closed the laptop. Men and women in uniform. The general always made sure to say it that way, but she knew plenty of officers who didn't. Plenty who still thought women had no place in combat roles. Like the 3 men at the diner. Like her own father, who'd stopped speaking to her when she joined the Air Force instead of getting married and giving him grandchildren. Like Colonel Patterson, her first commanding officer, who told her flat out that she'd never make it as a fighter pilot because women couldn't handle the G-forces. She'd proved them all wrong, graduated top of her class at flight school, made captain ahead of schedule, earned her spot flying the A-10 Thunderbolt II, the toughest close air support aircraft in the inventory. The Warthog, they called it, ugly but effective, built around a massive 30 cannon that could shred tanks and fortified positions. Slow compared to modern fighters, but nearly indestructible, with redundant systems and armor plating that could take a beating and keep flying. Sarah loved that plane, loved the raw power of it, the honest simplicity. No pretense, no flash, just a machine designed to do one job and do it well. She'd been good at that job, really good. Until she wasn't. The phone rang, breaking the silence. Sarah glanced at the screen. Unknown number. She let it go to voicemail, but a few seconds later a text message appeared. This is Rebecca Yates from the Creekside Gazette. I'm doing a story about the memorial dedication. Would love to interview you. Can we talk? Sarah deleted the message without responding. She'd learned early on that talking to reporters was a mistake. They never got it right. They always wanted the story to be bigger, more dramatic, more heroic than it was. And they definitely didn't want the truth. Another text came through, this time from a number she recognized. Lieutenant Marcus Webb, her former weapons officer. Hey, Major, saw you're doing the Creekside thing. Proud of you. You earned that medal, don't let anyone tell you different. Sarah stared at the message for a long time. Marcus had been in the other A-10 that day. He'd seen everything. He knew what really happened. She typed back, thanks, how are you doing? The response came quickly. Better, still have bad days. Therapy helps, you should try it again. Maybe. Sarah, you saved 16 lives that day. 16 Marines who went home to their families because of you. Remember that. She didn't reply. Instead, she set the phone down and walked to the window, looking out at the desert landscape stretching toward the mountains. The sky was a brilliant blue, not a cloud in sight, perfect flying weather. She hadn't flown since that day, 18 months. The longest she'd gone without flying since she was 23 years old. The Air Force had offered her a desk job at the Pentagon. Good pay, good benefits, a clear path to colonel. She'd turned it down. Some wounds ran too deep for promotions to fix. Sunday morning, Sarah drove out to the memorial site. It was on a hill overlooking the town, next to the old cemetery where generations of Creekside families were buried. She could see workers putting the finishing touches on the stone monument, a black granite wall with names engraved in gold, organized by conflict. Vietnam, Desert Storm, Iraq, Afghanistan. A truck was parked near the site, and as Sarah approached, she recognized the man standing next to it. Mayor Tom Gilmore, a heavyset man in his 60s with a handlebar mustache and a bolo tie. He saw her and waved. Major Chen, good to see you. He extended his hand and Sarah shook it. His grip was firm, almost aggressive. Beautiful sight, isn't it? Been working on this for 3 years, getting it ready for Veterans Day. It's very nice, sir. Got 47 names on that wall, 47 men from this county who gave their lives for this country. He paused. Well, 46 men and 1 woman, Army nurse in Vietnam, mortar attack. Sarah nodded, looking at the wall. The names were organized chronologically within each conflict. Near the bottom, under Afghanistan, she saw names she recognized. Danny Morrison, Kyle Peterson, both killed in action while she was deployed. Your name could have been on this wall, the mayor said quietly. From what I understand, you came pretty close. Everyone who deploys comes close, sir. Well, we're honored to have you here. This town is proud to recognize what you did, what you sacrificed. He clapped her on the shoulder. 5 days from now, you're going to stand up here and show these folks what a real American hero looks like. Sarah felt her stomach turn. I'm not a hero, sir. I was just doing my job. That's what all the heroes say. He grinned. You're going to be great. I can feel it. This is exactly what Creekside needs, inspiration, someone to look up to. After he left, Sarah stood alone at the memorial, reading the names. Danny Morrison, Dale's grandson, she realized. The Dale from the diner who'd been talking about how women couldn't handle combat. His grandson had died in Helmand province when an IED destroyed his Humvee. Sarah had been there that day, flying close air support for a different unit, but she'd heard the radio call, the desperate voices, the chaos. War didn't care about your opinions on who should fight. It took everyone equally. Monday through Thursday passed in a blur of quiet anxiety. Sarah kept to herself, avoiding the diner and most of town. She ran every morning before sunrise, pushing herself until her legs burned and her lungs ached. Physical pain was easier to deal with than the other kind. Thursday evening, there was a knock at her door. Sarah looked through the peephole and saw a woman in her 40s standing on the porch, holding a notepad. Rebecca Yates, the reporter. Sarah almost didn't open the door, but something about the woman's expression, patient, not pushy, made her reconsider. She opened it halfway. Major Chen, I'm Rebecca Yates from the Gazette. I know you didn't respond to my messages, and I respect that. But I just have one question if you'll give me 30 seconds. Sarah crossed her arms. What's your question? What do you want people in this town to know about what you did in Afghanistan? It was the last question Sarah expected, not asking for details of the battle, not asking about the Medal of Honor, just asking what she wanted people to know. I want them to know that the people who didn't come home were braver than I'll ever be, Sarah said quietly. I want them to know that every person who wears the uniform deserves respect, regardless of gender or job or rank. And I want them to know that war isn't what they see in the movies. It's complicated and terrible, and it changes you forever. Rebecca wrote quickly in her notepad, then looked up. Thank you, that's all I needed. She started to leave, then turned back. For what it's worth, Major, I've talked to 20 people about you in the past week. Half of them think you're a publicity stunt. The other half think you're the real deal. I did some research on what happened that day in Afghanistan. I think you're the real deal. I'm not, Sarah said. I'm just someone who survived when others didn't. That's not what the Marines you saved think. Rebecca left, and Sarah closed the door, leaning against it. Her hands were shaking now. The steady hands that never shook in the cockpit, that stayed calm under fire, were trembling. Tomorrow was Friday. Tomorrow she had to give her speech. Tomorrow this whole town would learn about the day she earned a medal she didn't want. The day the sky went silent. That night, Sarah dreamed again. She was in the cockpit of her A-10, call sign Rattler 23, flying low over the Afghan mountains. The radio was alive with traffic, ground forces in contact, requesting immediate air support. Enemy fighters had ambushed a Marine patrol, pinning them down in a narrow valley with no cover. Rattler 23, this is Outlaw 31. We are taking heavy fire from multiple positions. How copy? Outlaw 31, Rattler 23. Good copy. I have visual on your position. Stand by for gun run. She could see them below, tiny figures pressed against rocks, returning fire against an enemy they couldn't see clearly. Muzzle flashes from the ridgeline. Smoke rising from burning vehicles. Sarah lined up her approach, feeling the familiar weight of the aircraft respond to her touch. The A-10 wasn't graceful or fast, but it was precise. Deadly precise. Rattler 23 is in hot. She squeezed the trigger, and the GAU-8 cannon roared to life with its distinctive sound. BRRRRRT, shredding the enemy position. 30mm rounds tore through rock and earth and anything else in their path. Direct hit. Rattler, you're cleared for re-attack. She pulled up, banking hard, preparing for another run. That's when she heard it, or rather didn't hear it. Silence. The radio went dead, her instruments flickered, the whole electrical system was failing. She looked up through the canopy and saw it, contrails from a missile coming from behind, surface to air. Someone had a MA and PAD and they just fired it at her. The missile warning system was screaming, but she was too low for chaff or flares to help, too close to the ground to evade. Time slowed down. She could eject, pull the handle, punch out, let the plane crash. Standard procedure, save yourself. But if she did that, the Marines below would die. The enemy would overrun their position in minutes. No other aircraft was close enough to help. Sarah made her decision in less than a second. She didn't eject. Instead, she dove toward the enemy position, lining up one more gun run, even as the missile closed in, even as every instinct screamed at her to get out. Rattler 2-3, eject, eject, eject. Marcus's voice in her headset from his aircraft a mile away, watching it all happen. She didn't respond, she just kept flying. The cannon roared again. The enemy position disappeared in a cloud of dust and debris. And then the missile hit. Sarah woke up gasping, drenched in sweat. The bedroom was dark except for the digital clock showing 3:47 a.m. She sat up, trying to steady her breathing. The same dream, always the same dream, except the real event hadn't ended with the missile hitting her plane. It should have. The missile struck her left engine, tearing it apart, sending shrapnel through the tail section. Any normal aircraft would have gone down immediately. But the A-10 wasn't a normal aircraft. It kept flying. With one engine gone, hydraulics failing, and half her controls shot to hell, Sarah had somehow kept that plane in the air long enough to circle back and make 2 more gun runs. She'd cleared the enemy from 3 sides, giving the Marines enough breathing room to extract their wounded and call in reinforcements. Only then did she nurse the dying aircraft back toward base, crash-landing it in the desert 5 miles short of the runway. The impact had broken her collarbone, 3 ribs, and her left wrist, but she'd walked away. 16 Marines survived that day because she refused to eject. 6 months later, they gave her the Medal of Honor, the first woman to receive it for combat action in Afghanistan. It made national news. The president shook her hand. Senators posed for pictures with her. And all Sarah could think about was the 7 members of her squadron who didn't come home. The ones who died in other battles, other missions, while she was being celebrated as a hero. Survivor's guilt, the therapists called it, a normal response to trauma. It didn't feel normal. It felt like a weight she'd carry forever. Sarah got out of bed and walked to the kitchen. She poured a glass of water and stood at the sink, looking out at the dark desert. In a few hours, the sun would rise, and then it would be Friday. The day of the memorial dedication. The day she'd have to stand in front of Creekside and pretend to be the hero they wanted her to be. Friday morning arrived with a cloudless sky and a dry wind that carried dust across the empty streets of Creekside. Sarah stood in front of her bathroom mirror, adjusting the collar of her dress uniform. The Air Force blue fabric felt foreign now, like wearing someone else's clothes. She'd spent most of the past 18 months in jeans and t-shirts, trying to forget she'd ever been Major Sarah Chen. But the uniform didn't forget. The ribbons on her chest told the story she couldn't escape. Afghanistan Campaign Medal, Air Medal with Valor Device, Purple Heart. And there at the top, the light blue ribbon with white stars that drew everyone's attention, the Medal of Honor. She traced her finger over it, feeling the raised edge. Such a small piece of fabric to carry so much weight. Her phone buzzed. A text from General Martinez, "Good luck today. You've got this. Make us proud." Sarah didn't respond. She picked up her service cap, took one last look in the mirror, and walked out to her truck. The memorial site was already crowded when she arrived at 10 o'clock. Folding chairs arranged in neat rows, facing the black granite wall. A small stage with a podium draped in red, white, and blue bunting. American flags snapping in the wind. News vans from stations in Phoenix and Flagstaff, their satellite dishes pointing toward the sky. Sarah parked in the designated spot near the stage. Someone had put up a small sign that said, "Reserved for Major Chen," and sat in the truck for a moment, gathering herself. She could see them out there. Hundreds of people. Old veterans in their VFW caps and jackets covered with patches. Young families with children. High school kids who'd probably been required to attend for some class. And reporters, lots of reporters with cameras and microphones and hungry expressions. This was a mistake. She should have said no, she should have stayed away. But she'd given her word, and in the military, your word meant something. Sarah climbed out of the truck, and immediately a young man in a suit hurried over. Major Chen, I'm Derek Foster, the mayor's assistant. We're so honored to have you here. The program starts at 10:30. You're speaking after the mayor's opening remarks, and the invocation should be about 20 minutes. Is there anything you need? No, thank you, I'm fine. Great, just great. If you'll follow me, we have a VIP area set up near the stage. He led her through the crowd, and Sarah felt the eyes following her. People whispering, pointing. She kept her gaze forward, her military bearing automatic after 2 decades of practice. The VIP area was a roped-off section with better chairs and a canopy for shade. Several people were already seated. Mayor Gilmore, a woman who appeared to be his wife, a priest or pastor in clerical collar, and 2 older men in army uniforms from decades past. And there in the 3rd row sat Earl Hutchins, Tom Sawyer, and Dale Morrison from the diner. Earl saw her and his eyes widened. He leaned over to whisper something to Tom, who looked up sharply. Dale's expression was harder to read, something between surprise and suspicion. Major Chen, Mayor Gilmore bounded over, hand extended. You look magnificent, just magnificent. The uniform really drives it home, you know. This is exactly what I was hopping for. He lowered his voice conspiratorially. Between you and me, this town needs to see this, needs to understand that the military isn't just what they remember from their day. Things change, progress happens. Yes, sir. Now your speech. You've got something prepared, I hope. Sarah nodded. She'd written something the night before, though calling it a speech was generous. More like notes she hoped she could expand on without freezing up. Wonderful, just wonderful. Speak from the heart, that's what people want. Tell them about that day, the heroism, the sacrifice. Give them something to remember. He patted her shoulder and moved off to greet other arrivals. Sarah sat down in the front row, feeling exposed despite the shade canopy. In the cockpit, she'd always felt protected, enclosed in metal and purpose. Out here, under the open sky, she felt naked. The crowd continued to grow. By 10:20, there had to be 400 or 500 people gathered, more than a quarter of the town's entire population. News cameras set up on tripods, a photographer moving through the crowd, capturing faces and moments. Sarah's heart was pounding. Her hands were starting to sweat. She clasped them together in her lap, focusing on her breathing. In through the nose, out through the mouth. At exactly 10:30, Mayor Gilmore stepped up to the podium, and the crowd quieted. Friends, neighbors, fellow Americans, today is a special day for Creekside. Today, we dedicate this memorial to the brave men and women of Mohave County who made the ultimate sacrifice in service to our nation. His voice boomed through the speakers, practiced and political. Sarah half listened, her mind elsewhere. She was thinking about Danny Morrison, Dale's grandson, whose name was on that wall. She was thinking about the 7 faces from that photograph in her office. She was thinking about the sound the missile made when it hit her plane, a metallic shriek followed by sudden, terrible silence. And we are extraordinarily honored to have with us today a true American hero. Major Sarah Chen, United States Air Force, recipient of the Medal of Honor for conspicuous gallantry in action against an enemy of the United States. The crowd applauded. Sarah stood, and the applause grew louder. She walked to the stage, climbed the 3 steps, and stood next to the mayor. Major Chen flew the A-10 Thunderbolt in Afghanistan, the mayor continued. When a Marine unit came under heavy attack, she risked her life and ultimately saved 16 lives by continuing her attack run even after her aircraft was struck by a surface-to-air missile. Her bravery under fire exemplifies everything we honor here today. Ladies and gentlemen, Major Sarah Chen. More applause. Sarah stepped to the podium and looked out at the sea of faces. The cameras pointed at her like weapons. Her mouth was dry. She pulled the folded paper from her pocket and smoothed it on the podium. Her hands were shaking slightly. Not much, but enough that she had to grip the edges of the podium to steady them. Thank you, Mayor Gilmore, and thank you all for being here today. Her voice sounded strange through the speakers, amplified and distant. I'm honored to be part of this memorial dedication. These names represent real people, sons and daughters, brothers and sisters, parents and friends. They gave everything in service to something larger than themselves. She paused, looking at the black granite wall, at the gold letters catching the sunlight. I need to be honest with you about something. When people hear about what happened in Afghanistan, they use words like heroic and brave. But that's not how it felt in the moment. It felt like chaos. It felt like desperation. It felt like the only choice available. The crowd was completely silent now. Even the wind seemed to have paused. I was flying close air support that day, and a Marine patrol was pinned down. They were taking fire from multiple positions, and there was no cover, nowhere to retreat. My job was simple: eliminate the threat so those Marines could survive. That's what I was trained to do. That's what I was there for. Sarah's hands tightened on the podium. When my aircraft was hit, I had a choice. I could eject, save myself, follow standard procedure, or I could stay in the fight long enough to give those Marines a chance. I chose to stay, not because I was brave, not because I was heroic, but because those men on the ground deserved someone who wouldn't quit on them. She could see faces in the crowd now, really see them. An old woman with tears streaming down her cheeks. A middle-aged man in a Marine Corps cap, nodding slowly. Young kids who didn't quite understand but knew this was important. The A-10 Thunderbolt is an incredible aircraft. It's tough, it's resilient. It's designed to take damage and keep flying. That plane saved my life by refusing to quit, even when every system was failing. And I think. Her voice caught. She stopped, took a breath, continued. I think that's what military service is really about. Not quitting. Not abandoning your mission or your people, even when everything is falling apart. The names on this wall belong to people who embodied that spirit. They didn't quit. They didn't walk away. And we owe them more than ceremonies and speeches. We owe them our commitment to honor their sacrifice by being the kind of country worth dying for. She looked directly at the camera. But I also want to say something about who serves. I've heard people in this town question whether women belong in combat roles, whether we're strong enough, tough enough, brave enough. I'm not going to stand here and argue that women and men are exactly the same. We're not. But strength comes in many forms. Courage comes in many forms, and the ability to do your job under pressure has nothing to do with gender. In the VIP section, she saw Earl shift uncomfortably in his seat. The military I served in is stronger because it includes everyone who's willing and able to serve. Everyone who's willing to put the mission first, the team first, and their own comfort last. That's the standard. Not gender, not background, just willingness to serve. She folded the paper and stepped back from the podium. These 47 names represent that standard. They represent the best of us. And I truly hope, that we can honor them by being better than we were yesterday, by questioning our assumptions, by recognizing that strength and sacrifice know no boundaries. She looked at the memorial wall one more time. Thank you. The applause started slowly, then built. People stood. The cameras captured it all. Mayor Gilmore was beaming, shaking her hand vigorously as she stepped away from the podium. But Sarah barely noticed. She was looking at Dale Morrison in the VIP section, watching his face. The man's expression had changed. The skepticism was gone, replaced by something else, something raw. He stood up and walked toward her. Sarah tensed, unsure what to expect. Dale stopped in front of her, and for a long moment they just looked at each other. Then he extended his hand. My grandson Danny is on that wall, he said quietly. He was 22 years old, best kid you ever met. I used to tell him women had no place in combat. I was wrong. Thank you for your service, Major, and thank you for what you said today. Sarah shook his hand. Danny died a hero, sir. You should be proud. I am. His eyes were wet. I am proud of him and of soldiers like you. He walked away and Sarah stood there, feeling something shift inside her. Not healing. It was too soon for that. Maybe it would always be too soon. But something. A crack in the wall she'd built around herself. The rest of the ceremony passed in a blur. A pastor's prayer. A bugler playing taps. The formal unveiling of the memorial, the cloth falling away to reveal all 47 names in gold. Afterward, people lined up to meet her, to shake her hand, to take pictures. Sarah did her duty, smiled for cameras, said the right things, but inside she was exhausted, emotionally wrung out. Rebecca Yates, the reporter, managed to catch her as the crowd was dispersing. That was a powerful speech, Major. Do you have a minute for a few questions? I really don't. Just 2 questions, I promise. Sarah hesitated, then nodded. First question, what made you decide to be so direct about the gender issue? That must have taken courage, especially in a conservative town like this. It wasn't about courage. It was about honesty. If we're going to honor the fallen, we need to honor all of them. And that means confronting uncomfortable truths. Rebecca scribbled notes. Second question, you said you made a choice to stay in the fight, but from the reports I've read, your aircraft was severely damaged. Some analysts say it's a miracle you survived. Do you think that choice was worth it? Sarah looked at the reporter for a long moment. 16 Marines went home to their families. 7 members of my squadron didn't. Was it worth it? I don't know how to answer that. I just know I had to try. Thank you, Major. As Rebecca walked away, Sarah saw Earl and Tom standing near Earl's pickup truck watching her. Earl raised his hand in a small wave, not mocking this time, but respectful. Tom nodded. Small steps, small changes. It wasn't much, but it was something. Sarah drove home as the sun reached its peak. The ceremony had lasted almost 2 hours, and she was drained. All she wanted was to go home, take off the uniform, and be alone. But when she pulled into her driveway, there was a car parked on the street in front of her house. A rental sedan with California plates, and standing on her porch was a man she hadn't seen in 18 months. Captain James Reese, her former squadron commander. Sarah's stomach dropped. She parked the truck and got out slowly. Sir? Reese turned, and Sarah saw immediately that something was wrong. His face was drawn, older than she remembered. He was in civilian clothes, jeans, and a button-down shirt, and he looked uncomfortable, like he didn't quite know how to stand without the uniform. Major Chen, I apologize for showing up unannounced. I tried calling, but... I've been avoiding calls. Sarah climbed the porch steps. What are you doing here, sir? I'm not sir anymore. I retired 6 months ago, medical. He gestured vaguely at his midsection. Took some shrapnel in Kandahar, nothing life-threatening, but enough that they decided I was done flying. I'm sorry to hear that. Don't be, I'm fine with it. He looked at her door. Can we talk inside? There's something you need to know. Sarah's heart rate picked up. She unlocked the door and led him into the small house. Reese looked around at the sparse furnishings, the bare walls, the general emptiness. You're not settled, he observed. I'm not staying long. Where are you going? I don't know yet. They sat in the living room and Reese leaned forward, elbows on his knees. I watched your speech online. Someone was live streaming it. You did good, Chen, really good. Thank you. But that's not why I'm here. He took a breath. There's going to be an investigation. Sarah felt cold. What kind of investigation? Your actions in Afghanistan. Specifically, your decision not to eject when ordered to do so. I was never ordered to eject. Marcus called it out as a warning, but it wasn't a direct order. The Air Force is taking a different view. There are some people at the Pentagon who think you violated protocols, that you took unnecessary risks and endangered military assets, namely a $25 million aircraft, for no tactical advantage. Sarah stood up, anger flashing through her. No tactical advantage. I saved 16 lives. I know that. You know that. Everyone who was there knows that. But you know how the bureaucracy works. Some colonel pushing papers at the Pentagon looks at the after-action reports and sees an officer who ignored safety procedures and cost the Air Force an aircraft. That aircraft was already lost, the missile. I know, I'm not arguing with you, I'm telling you what's coming. Reese stood too. There's going to be a hearing, probably in January. They're going to question your judgment, your decision-making. They're going to imply that you were reckless. Sarah walked to the window, looking out at the desert. They're going to try to take away the Medal of Honor. I don't think they'll go that far, too much political blowback. But they might try to force you into retirement, or assign you to some desk job where you can't cause any more problems. Let them, Sarah said quietly. I don't want to fly anymore anyway. That's bullshit and you know it. Reese's voice was hard now. You're one of the best pilots I've ever seen. You love flying, you're just scared. Sarah turned to face him. I'm not scared, I'm tired. I'm tired of fighting. I'm tired of proving myself. I'm tired of... Her voice broke. She stopped, took a breath. Reese's expression softened. I get it. I do. But running away doesn't fix anything. And these people at the Pentagon, they're not going to stop with you. If they can second-guess your decisions, they can second-guess anyone's. They can use this to argue against women in combat roles, against pilot autonomy, against a dozen things that matter. So what do you want me to do? Fight, stand up at that hearing and defend what you did. Remind them why we give pilots the authority to make life and death decisions in the moment. Remind them that sometimes the right choice looks like the wrong one from a desk in Virginia. Sarah shook her head. I don't have the energy for another fight. Then find it. Reese moved toward the door. Because if you don't fight this, you're not just letting them win. You're letting down every pilot who will come after you, every woman who will face the same doubts and the same barriers. He paused at the door. You earned that Medal of Honor, Chen. Don't let them make you ashamed of it. After Reese left, Sarah sat in the empty living room for a long time, watching the shadows move across the walls as the sun tracked across the sky. An investigation, a hearing, more questions, more scrutiny, more people picking apart the worst day of her life. She thought about what Reese had said, about fighting, about standing up, about the next generation of women who'd wear the uniform. She thought about Dale Morrison, shaking her hand, thanking her. She thought about those 16 Marines, alive today because she'd made a choice. And she thought about the A-10, that ugly, stubborn aircraft that had refused to die, that had kept flying when it should have fallen from the sky, that had whispered, even in its death throes, I'm still here, I'm not done yet. Maybe she wasn't done yet either. Sarah stood up and walked to her office. She opened the laptop and pulled up her email, started typing. General Martinez. I've been informed that there will be an investigation into my actions on July 17, 2023. I want to make it clear that I stand by every decision I made that day. I am willing to appear at any hearing and provide testimony. I will not be intimidated, and I will not back down. I also want to request reinstatement to active flight status. I am ready to return to duty. Respectfully, Major Sarah Chen. She hit send before she could second-guess herself. Then she walked outside and looked up at the clear Arizona sky. Somewhere up there, other pilots were flying. Other missions were happening. Other warriors were making impossible choices in impossible situations. The sky had gone silent once, but it wouldn't stay that way. And neither would she. The email from General Martinez arrived 3 days later on Monday morning. Sarah was in the middle of her run, 5 miles through the desert, her usual route, when her phone buzzed in her pocket. She stopped, hands on her knees, breathing hard, and pulled it out. Major Chen, your request for reinstatement to flight status is approved pending completion of a medical evaluation and proficiency check. Report to Luke AFB on November 20th for assessment. Regarding the investigation, first hearing is scheduled for January 15th at the Pentagon. You will need legal representation. JAG will assign someone, but I recommend you find your own counsel if possible. This is going to get political. Stay strong, you have more allies than you know. Martinez. Sarah stared at the message for a long moment, then looked up at the sky. It was that perfect blue again, cloudless and infinite, flying weather. She felt something stir in her chest. Not quite hope, she wasn't ready for that yet, but maybe anticipation. The thought of being back in a cockpit, of feeling that perfect union of human and machine, of having a purpose again. Her phone buzzed again. This time it was a text from Marcus Webb. Heard about the hearing. I'm testifying on your behalf. Already told JAG everything. You did the right thing that day. I won't let them rewrite history. Sarah typed back, thank you, that means everything. She finished her run and headed home to shower. As she was getting dressed, another message came through, this one from an unknown number. Major Chen, this is Colonel Jennifer Hayes, USAF, retired. I heard about your situation. I run a legal advocacy group for military women facing discrimination or retaliation. We'd like to help. No charge, please call me. Sarah saved the number. Allies, Martinez had said, more than she knew. That afternoon, she drove into Phoenix to meet with Colonel Hayes. The address led to a modest office building in Scottsdale, 3 stories of tan stucco that looked like every other building in Arizona. The directory listed Hayes Legal Advocacy on the 2nd floor. The waiting room was small but professional. Military photos on the walls, magazines on the coffee table, a receptionist who smiled warmly when Sarah walked in. Major Chen, Colonel Hayes is expecting you right this way. Colonel Jennifer Hayes was in her 50s, with short gray hair and the bearing of someone who'd spent decades giving orders and expecting them to be followed. She stood when Sarah entered, extending her hand. "Major Chen, thank you for coming. Please sit." The office was decorated with military memorabilia, photos of Hayes in various uniforms over the years, squadron patches, a folded flag in a display case. On the desk was a photograph of Hayes with another woman, both in civilian clothes, both smiling. Hayes saw Sarah looking at it. "My wife, Laura. She's the one who convinced me to start this organization after I retired. Said I needed to channel my righteous anger into something productive." Sarah smiled slightly. "How long have you been doing this?" 5 years. We've handled about 40 cases, everything from sexual harassment to unlawful command influence to career retaliation. We win most of them." Hayes leaned back in her chair. "Now let's talk about your situation. I've reviewed the preliminary reports. The Air Force is arguing that you violated Article 92, failure to obey a lawful order, when you didn't eject from your aircraft." "It wasn't an order. It was a warning from my wingman." That's going to be the key distinction. They'll argue it was an implicit order based on standard procedures. You'll argue it was information you considered while making a tactical decision. The problem is, there's a lot of gray area, and gray area gives bureaucrats room to maneuver. Hayes pulled out a file folder. "But here's what they're really after. This isn't about protocol, it's about optics. You're a high-profile case, Medal of Honor recipient, first woman honored for that specific type of combat action in Afghanistan. You've become a symbol." "A symbol of what?" "Of change, of progress. And that makes certain people very uncomfortable. People who believe the military should look and operate the way it did when they served. People who see women in combat roles as a political statement rather than operational necessity." Sarah felt her jaw tighten. "So this is about gender." "Everything is about gender when you're a woman in a male-dominated field. You know that." Hayes leaned forward. "But here's the good news. They've made a tactical error. By challenging your decision-making, they're implicitly challenging the judgment of every Medal of Honor recipient. By questioning whether you should have ejected, they're second-guessing a split-second choice made under fire. That's a very dangerous precedent." "So what's our strategy?" "We go on offense. We don't just defend what you did. We put them on trial. We ask questions like, how many men have received medals for making risky decisions? How many male pilots have stayed with damaged aircraft to complete their missions? How many times has the Air Force celebrated that kind of courage and commitment?" Hayes pulled out several files. "I've already started compiling cases. In 1972, Major John Smith stayed with a damaged F-4 in Vietnam to guide his wounded backseater through an emergency landing instead of ejecting. Medal of Honor. In 1991, Captain Robert Wilson flew a damaged A-10 back to base after being hit by anti-aircraft fire during Desert Storm. Distinguished Service Cross. In 2003. "I get the point," Sarah said. "Men do what I did and they're heroes. I do it and I'm reckless." "Exactly, and that's the argument we make. Not that you should be judged by different standards, but that you should be judged by the same standards. By the standards the military has always used to evaluate courage under fire." Sarah sat back, thinking. When you put it that way, it sounds straightforward. "It's not. They'll come at you hard. They'll bring in technical experts to say the aircraft was too damaged to fly safely. They'll bring in psychologists to question your judgment under stress. They'll bring in commanders who'll talk about the importance of following procedures. It's going to be ugly." "I can handle ugly." Hayes smiled. "I believe you can. But Major, I need to know, are you doing this because you want to clear your name or because you want to make a point?" "What's the difference?" "Intent matters. If you're just trying to clear your name, we can probably negotiate a quiet settlement. They drop the investigation, you agree not to talk about it publicly, everyone moves on. But if you want to make a point, if you want to use this as an opportunity to challenge the system, then we're going to court, and it's going to be a fight." Sarah thought about Dale Morrison, shaking her hand. About the young girls in the audience at the memorial watching her speak. About the next woman who'd sit in an A-10 cockpit and face an impossible choice. "I want to fight," she said. "I want them to have to defend their position in public. I want people to see what this is really about." Hayes nodded slowly. "Then that's what we'll do, but I need you to understand something. This will get personal. They will dig into your life, your career, your relationships. They will try to find anything they can use to undermine your credibility. Are you prepared for that?" "I've got nothing to hide." "Everyone's got something, and these people are very good at finding it." Sarah stood up. When do we start? We already have. I'll file a formal response to the investigation this week. We'll request all documentation related to similar cases for comparison, and we'll start preparing your testimony. You're going to need to relive that day in excruciating detail. I relive it every night anyway. Hayes's expression softened. I know, but this will be different. This will be public. This will be permanent record. Make sure you're ready. That evening, Sarah sat at her kitchen table with her laptop, reviewing the documentation Hayes had given her. Incident reports, technical specifications, procedural manuals, the bureaucratic skeleton of the worst day of her life. She opened a folder labeled Comparable Cases and started reading. Major John Smith, the F-4 pilot Hayes had mentioned. Sarah pulled up his Medal of Honor citation. Exhibiting extraordinary heroism and devotion to duty despite extreme personal danger. Captain Robert Wilson, the A-10 pilot from Desert Storm. Valorous actions and dedication to the mission placed him at risk, but ultimately saved the lives of ground personnel. Page after page, case after case, men who'd made the same kinds of choices she had, men who'd been celebrated, promoted, honored. And now the same military that had given them medals was questioning whether she deserved hers. Sarah's phone rang. She glanced at the screen, another unknown number. She almost didn't answer, but something made her pick up. Major Chen. Yes. This is Sergeant First Class Mike Torres, U.S. Marine Corps. I was part of the patrol you supported in Afghanistan. Outlaw 3-1. Sarah's breath caught. Sergeant Torres. I heard about the investigation, ma'am. I wanted you to know that myself and every Marine who was there that day is willing to testify. You saved our lives. We don't forget that. I appreciate that, Sergeant. No, ma'am, you don't understand. We need to do this. What you did, staying with that aircraft, making those gun runs while you were taking fire, that's the only reason I'm here talking to you right now. That's the only reason I got to meet my daughter, who was born 3 months after I got home. So whatever they're trying to do to you, we're not going to let it happen. Sarah felt her throat tighten. Thank you. There's 16 of us, ma'am. We're all on board. We've got lawyers, we've got contacts in Congress, we've got everything we need. You stood by us. Now we stand by you. After he hung up, Sarah sat in the quiet kitchen, feeling the weight of it all. The investigation, the hearing, the fight ahead, but also feeling something else. Support allies, people willing to stand up. She wasn't alone in this. The next 2 weeks passed quickly. Sarah drove to Luke Air Force Base near Phoenix for her medical evaluation and proficiency check. The medical was routine. The doctors cleared her without hesitation. The broken bones from the crash landing had healed completely. The proficiency check was harder. Not physically. Her skills were still there, muscle memory taking over as soon as she strapped into the simulator. But emotionally, every moment in that cockpit brought back memories. The sound of the engines, the feel of the stick, the view through the canopy. The instructor pilot, a major named Rodriguez, watched her run through the scenarios without comment. When she finished, he turned to her with a serious expression. Your scores are excellent, honestly better than most pilots who have been flying regularly. But I have to ask, are you sure you're ready for this, getting back in an actual aircraft after what happened? I won't know until I try. Fair enough, you're cleared for flight status. The paperwork will be processed by end of week. Sarah thanked him and left the simulator building. Outside, she stood in the Arizona sun and looked at the flight line, where rows of A-10s sat waiting. Ugly, powerful, beautiful machines. She wanted to fly again, needed to fly again. The time away had been necessary, she understood that now, but it was time to move forward. Thanksgiving came and went quietly. Sarah spent it alone, which was how she preferred it. Her mother called from California, asking when she was going to visit, when she was going to settle down, when she was going to give up this military nonsense and find a nice husband. The same conversation they'd been having for 20 years. Sarah gave her usual answers, soon maybe, we'll see, and ended the call as quickly as politeness allowed. The day after Thanksgiving, she got a call from Rebecca Yates, the reporter from the Creekside Gazette. Major Chen, I'm sorry to bother you on the holiday weekend, but I've been doing some research into your case, and I found something you should know about. What is it? The lead investigator on your case is Colonel Richard Patterson. He was your commanding officer at one point, wasn't he? Sarah's blood went cold. Yes, early in my career. How did you find that out? Public records, assignment histories. I'm good at digging. But here's the interesting part. Patterson has a history of opposing women in combat roles. He's testified before Congress 3 times arguing against it. He's written opinion pieces. He's been very vocal. And now he's investigating me. Seems like a conflict of interest, doesn't it? Sarah thanked Rebecca and hung up. She immediately called Colonel Hayes. We need to file a motion to recuse Patterson from the investigation, Hayes said immediately. This is textbook bias. He's on record opposing everything you represent. Will it work? Maybe, maybe not, but it puts pressure on them. It shows we're not going to roll over, and it creates a paper trail of their bias, which helps us if this goes to court. Do it. December arrived with cooler weather and mounting tension. The hearing was 6 weeks away. Sarah spent her days preparing, reviewing documents, working with Hayes, coordinating with the Marines who'd volunteered to testify. And she spent her evenings alone, wrestling with memories and doubts and the constant weight of wondering if she'd made the right choice. On December 10th, she got the call she'd been waiting for. General Martinez, his voice carefully neutral. Major Chen, I wanted to inform you personally. The motion to recuse Colonel Patterson was denied. He'll remain as lead investigator. On what grounds? The review board determined that his professional opinions don't constitute bias. They're saying he's capable of objective analysis regardless of his personal views. That's bullshit. I agree, but it's the decision. He paused. Sarah, I want you to know that there are a lot of people at senior levels who think this investigation is wrong, but the political winds are blowing hard right now. There's a faction that wants to use your case as an example. An example of what? Of why women shouldn't be in combat roles, of why diversity initiatives are compromising readiness, of why we need to go back to traditional standards. His voice was tight with anger. They're not interested in the truth, they're interested in the narrative. Then I'll give them a different narrative. That's what I'm counting on. Just be prepared. They're going to come at you with everything they've got. After the call ended, Sarah sat on her back porch, looking out at the desert sunset. The sky was painting itself in shades of orange and pink, beautiful and indifferent to human struggles. She thought about Patterson, the man who'd told her she'd never make it as a fighter pilot, who'd questioned her every decision, who'd made her prove herself over and over while her male peers were given the benefit of the doubt. Now he was in charge of investigating her. It was almost perfect, in a terrible way. The universe giving her one more chance to prove herself to the man who'd never believed in her. Fine, she'd do it. She pulled out her phone and texted Marcus. Patterson is lead investigator. Remember him. The response came quickly. Oh hell, yeah, I remember, this just got personal. It was always personal. True, but now we know what we're up against. We can plan accordingly. Sarah set the phone down and watched the sun slip below the horizon. Darkness settled over the desert, and the stars began to appear, one by one, filling the vast, empty sky. Tomorrow she'd start preparing in earnest. Tomorrow she'd gear up for the fight. But tonight she just sat and watched the stars, remembering what it felt like to fly among them. The C-17 transport aircraft descended through gray clouds over Andrews Air Force Base, and Sarah felt her stomach tighten. Not from turbulence, the flight from Phoenix had been smooth, but from the reality of what waited below. Washington, D.C., the Pentagon. The hearing that would determine whether her service, her sacrifice, her very integrity would be validated or destroyed. She'd spent Christmas in Creekside, avoiding most social interaction but attending a small dinner at Betty's diner. Betty had closed the restaurant to regular customers and invited veterans and active-duty personnel, a private gathering that felt more real than any official ceremony. Earl, Tom, and Dale had been there, and they'd approached her table with something that looked like genuine respect. We'll be watching the hearing, Earl had said. A lot of folks around here will be. They try to tear you down, they're going to hear from us. It was a strange feeling having support from men who dismissed her just months before. But people could change. People could learn. The question was, could institutions? The plane landed with barely a bump, and Sarah gathered her bags. She was traveling in civilian clothes, jeans, a blue sweater, a leather jacket. but her dress uniform was carefully packed, ready for tomorrow's hearing. Colonel Hayes had insisted on meeting her at the airport, and Sarah spotted her immediately in the terminal, standing with military posture despite the casual clothing. "Welcome to Washington," Hayes said, gripping Sarah's hand firmly. "How are you feeling?" "Ready." "Good, because we've got work to do." Hayes led her toward the parking garage. "I've booked you a hotel in Arlington, close to the Pentagon. Tonight we're meeting with Marcus Webb and Sergeant Torres. I want you to hear their testimonies before tomorrow. Make sure we're all telling the same story." "We're telling the truth." "The truth has different versions depending on perspective. We need to make sure our perspectives align." They drove through D.C. traffic, the city dressed in winter gray, monuments and government buildings standing like sentinels over the nation's business. Sarah had been here before, of course, for the Medal of Honor ceremony at the White House, for various briefings and meetings over the years. But it always felt foreign, disconnected from the real military she'd known. The hotel was a chain establishment, functional and anonymous. Sarah checked in and dropped her bags in the room before meeting Hayes in the lobby. They drove to a restaurant in Georgetown, a quiet Italian place where they'd reserved a private room in the back. Marcus was already there, looking uncomfortable in a suit and tie. He stood when Sarah entered and pulled her into a hug. "Good to see you, Major." "You too, Marcus." She stepped back, looking at him. "How are you doing?" "Better, therapy's helping, still having nightmares, but they're less frequent." He gestured to the table. "Torres and his wife should be here any minute. He's bringing documentation, photos, tactical maps, everything from that day." Colonel Hayes ordered coffee for everyone, and they settled into chairs around the table. 10 minutes later, Sergeant Mike Torres arrived with a petite woman who had kind eyes and a firm handshake. "Major Chen, this is my wife, Lisa. She's the one who made me call you. Said if I didn't, she'd never forgive me." Lisa smiled. "My husband doesn't sleep well unless he's doing the right thing, and this is the right thing." Torres opened a folder and spread papers across the table. "Ma'am, I've put together a complete timeline of the engagement. Radio transcripts, after-action reports, statements from every Marine in my unit. Everything supports your version of events." Sarah looked at the papers, official forms, handwritten notes, printed emails. The documentary evidence of war, sanitized and organized. "Walk me through it," Hayes said, "from the beginning." Torres took a breath and began. "July 17, 2023. Our patrol was conducting a security sweep in the Korangal Valley. Intelligence suggested the area was clear, but we knew better. The Korangal is never clear. Sure enough, about 40 minutes into the patrol, we got hit from 3 sides. Coordinated ambush. At least 30 enemy fighters, maybe more." He pointed to a topographical map. "We were here in this valley. No cover, no good defensive positions. They had the high ground on both ridges and blocking positions at the mouth of the valley. Classic kill zone." Marcus leaned forward. "That's when you called for air support." "Right, we had 2 A-10s in the area, Rattler 2-3 and Rattler 2-4. Major Chen was 2-3, Captain Webb was 2-4. Response time was less than 8 minutes. Sarah remembered that call, the desperation in the ground controller's voice. The words that every combat pilot dreads, troops in contact, danger close. Torres continued. Major Chen arrived first and immediately began engaging enemy positions on the eastern ridge. First gun run was textbook, eliminated the heavy machine gun position that was tearing us apart. Second run took out a mortar team. By the time Captain Webb arrived, the situation was already improving. "That's when the missile hit," Marcus said quietly. "Yes, sir, we saw it from the ground. SA-7 shoulder-fired missile came from the western ridge, direct hit on Major Chen's left engine. We all thought," his voice caught. "We all thought we were about to watch her die." Lisa took her husband's hand, squeezing it gently. "But the aircraft stayed airborne," Torres continued. "Smoking, clearly damaged but flying, and instead of breaking off, instead of ejecting, Major Chen came back around for another run, took out the missile position that had just shot her down." Hayes was taking notes. "Did she communicate with you during this time?" "Yes, ma'am. She told us to mark our position and get ready to move. She said she was going to clear us a path out of the valley." "And did she?" "Ma'am, she made 4 more gun runs with that damaged aircraft. 4. She destroyed every significant enemy position in that valley while flying a plane that should have been falling out of the sky. By the time she was done, we had enough breathing room to extract our wounded and call in reinforcements. Sarah closed her eyes, remembering the feel of the controls, sluggish and unresponsive, the smell of smoke in the cockpit, the blaring alarms she'd learned to ignore, the voice in her head saying just one more run, just one more. All 16 Marines in my unit survived, Torres said. 3 of us were wounded, but we all came home. That doesn't happen without Major Chen's actions. Hayes nodded, still writing. This is good, very good, but here's what the other side is going to argue. Major Chen should have ejected immediately upon taking damage. By continuing to fly, she risked losing both herself and the aircraft. They'll say that other air support could have been called in, that her actions were reckless and violated safety protocols. That's bullshit, Marcus said flatly. Sorry, Colonel, but it is. The nearest other air support was 20 minutes out. Those Marines would have been overrun in 5 minutes without Major Chen's continued presence. I agree, but we need to be prepared for that argument. Hayes looked at Sarah. What were you thinking when the missile hit? Walk me through your decision-making process. Sarah opened her eyes, forcing herself back to that moment. When the missile hit, I had about 3 seconds to make a decision. Eject or stay. If I ejected, the aircraft would have crashed somewhere in the valley. No way to control where. It could have hit the Marines, could have hit civilians, could have given the enemy a propaganda victory, and the ground situation would have remained critical. So you stayed. I assessed the aircraft. One engine gone, hydraulics compromised, but the other engine was still producing thrust. The flight controls were partially responsive. I calculated that I could maintain enough control for at least a few more minutes, long enough to complete the mission. Was it scary? Hayes asked. Sarah looked at her. Every combat mission is scary. Fear is just information. You acknowledge it and keep working. That's a good answer. Use that exact phrasing tomorrow. They spent the next 3 hours going over every detail, every decision, every possible question the board might ask. By the time they finished, it was after midnight. Sarah was exhausted, but her mind was racing. Back at the hotel, she lay in bed staring at the ceiling, knowing sleep wouldn't come easy. The nightmares were worse when she was stressed. She could already feel them waiting. The Pentagon was exactly as she remembered it. Imposing, bureaucratic, a building that seemed designed to make individuals feel small. Sarah walked through security with Hayes at her side, both of them in dress uniforms now. They'd been directed to a conference room on the 4th floor where the hearing would take place. The room was set up like a courtroom. A long table at the front for the investigative board. A witness chair facing them. Rows of seats behind for observers, already half filled with uniformed personnel, civilians in suits, and several people with press credentials. They opened it to media, Hayes muttered. That's good for us. Transparency helps our case. Colonel Richard Patterson was already seated at the board table, reviewing papers. He looked up when Sarah entered, and for a moment their eyes met. He was older than she remembered, gray hair, deep lines around his eyes, but his expression was the same, skeptical, dismissive, certain of his own righteousness. Sarah held his gaze until he looked away. All rise, a bailiff called out, and everyone stood as 3 more officers entered and took their seats at the board table. A general, a colonel, and a lieutenant colonel. The general, whose name tag read MORRISON, would chair the proceeding. Wait, Morrison. Sarah glanced at the gallery and saw Dale Morrison seated in the front row. Was this general a relative? The general spoke. This hearing is convened to investigate the actions of Major Sarah Chen, United States Air Force, on July 17, 2023, in the Korangal Valley, Afghanistan. Major Chen is accused of violating Article 92 of the Uniform Code of Military Justice, failure to obey a lawful order or regulation, specifically, failure to eject from a damaged aircraft when safety protocols required such action. He looked directly at Sarah. Major Chen, do you understand the charges? Yes, sir. You have the right to representation. I see Colonel Jennifer Hayes is present. Will she be representing you? Yes, sir. Very well. Colonel Patterson, you may present the Air Force's case. Patterson stood, buttoning his jacket. He looked comfortable, confident. Thank you, General Morrison. The facts of this case are straightforward. On July 17, 2023, Major Chen's aircraft was struck by a surface-to-air missile, causing catastrophic damage to the left engine and significant damage to other systems. Air Force regulations. specifically Technical Order 1A-10-1, Section 317, state that pilots must eject from severely damaged aircraft when controllability is in question. He clicked a remote and a slide appeared on the screen at the front of the room. The damaged A-10 photographed after Sarah's emergency landing. It looked like it had been through a shredder, engine missing, tail section shredded, hydraulic lines severed. Major Chen ignored this requirement and continued flying for an additional 12 minutes, making multiple attack runs in a severely compromised aircraft. While her intentions may have been admirable, her actions were reckless and endangered herself, the aircraft, and potentially the ground personnel she was attempting to support. He let that hang for a moment before continuing. This hearing will demonstrate that Major Chen's actions, while ultimately successful, violated established protocols designed to preserve both personnel and equipment. We will show that her decision-making in that moment was flawed, and that the military cannot afford to reward such behavior, regardless of the outcome. Patterson sat down, looking satisfied. Hayes stood. If it please the board, I'd like to make an opening statement. General Morrison nodded. Proceed. The Air Force's case rests on a fundamental misunderstanding of what military service requires. Yes, there are regulations. Yes, there are protocols. But there is also judgment. There is initiative. There is the expectation that officers will assess each situation on its own merits and make the best decision possible with the information available. She clicked her own remote, and a different image appeared. The same damaged A-10, but from a different angle, showing the right engine still intact. Major Chen did not ignore safety protocols. She assessed her aircraft's capabilities, evaluated the tactical situation, and determined that she could continue the mission. That assessment proved correct. Not only did she survive, she completed the mission with extraordinary effectiveness. 16 Marines went home to their families because Major Chen exercised precisely the kind of judgment we train our officers to develop. Hayes walked to the center of the room. But this case isn't really about regulations or protocols. It's about whether the military trusts its officers, particularly its female officers, to make life-and-death decisions in combat. The Air Force has a long history of celebrating pilots who took risks to accomplish the mission. Today, we'll show that Major Chen deserves the same recognition, not persecution, for doing her job exactly as she was trained to do. She sat down and Sarah felt a surge of gratitude. Hayes was good, really good. General Morrison looked at Patterson. Call your first witness. The Air Force's first witness was Lieutenant Colonel David Armstrong, an A-10 pilot with 20 years' experience. Patterson led him through a technical analysis of the damage to Sarah's aircraft, establishing that the damage was severe and, in Armstrong's opinion, should have required immediate ejection. In your professional opinion, Colonel Armstrong, was Major Chen's aircraft capable of safe flight after the missile strike? No, sir. The damage was too extensive. Loss of one engine, severed hydraulic lines, damaged control surfaces. Any one of those could be survivable, but all three together make the aircraft extremely difficult to control. And should Major Chen have ejected? Yes, sir. Standard procedure in that situation is to eject immediately. Hayes cross-examined carefully. Colonel Armstrong, you said the damage made the aircraft extremely difficult to control. Not impossible to control, correct? Well, technically. Yes or no, Colonel, was it possible to control the aircraft? It would depend on the pilot's skill and... Thank you. So an experienced, skilled pilot might be able to maintain control despite the damage. Armstrong hesitated. Possibly. Major Chen has over 3,000 flight hours in the A-10. Would you consider that experienced? Yes. And she successfully flew that damaged aircraft for 12 minutes, completed multiple combat runs, and then crash-landed it in a controlled manner. Would you say that demonstrates skill? I suppose, but... Thank you, Colonel. No further questions. The next witness was a civilian technical expert who testified about the cost of replacing the destroyed A-10, approximately $25 million. Patterson made much of this, emphasizing that Sarah's decision to keep flying had cost the taxpayers a significant sum. Hayes destroyed this argument on cross-examination. Sir, what's the cost of training a replacement pilot? I'm not sure of the exact. It's approximately $11 million to train a fighter pilot to Major Chen's level. So by not ejecting, she potentially saved the Air Force $11 million, correct? I suppose that's one way to look at it. And what's the value of 16 Marines' lives? Can you put a dollar figure on that? The expert had no answer. The afternoon session brought Marcus Webb to the stand. He was nervous but steady, his testimony supporting everything Sarah had said. Captain Webb, you were flying Rattler 24 that day. What was your assessment of Major Chen's aircraft after the missile strike? I could see she was in trouble. Smoke, obvious damage, but she was still flying. Did you order her to eject? No, sir. I called out that she was hit and recommended she assess for ejection. But it wasn't a direct order. Combat decisions happen too fast for that kind of micromanagement. Did you believe her aircraft was still flyable? Marcus looked directly at Patterson. I believed that Major Chen was the best pilot I've ever flown with, and if anyone could keep that plane flying, it was her. I was right. Patterson tried to shake him on cross-examination, but Marcus held firm. Sir, with all due respect, you weren't there. You didn't see what we saw, you didn't hear those Marines screaming for help. Major Chen made the right call. The hearing recessed at 1700 hours. Sarah and Hayes grabbed dinner at a nearby restaurant, both too keyed up to eat much. Tomorrow they'll bring their heavy hitters, Hayes said. Probably General Hendricks from Air Combat Command. Maybe some Pentagon staff officers. They'll try to make this about doctrine and policy rather than what actually happened. What about our witnesses? Sergeant Torres testifies in the morning. That'll be powerful. Nothing beats a guy saying, this person saved my life. Then we put you on the stand in the afternoon. Sarah's stomach nodded. I'm ready. I know you are. But Sarah, understand something. Patterson is going to come at you hard. He's going to try to make you lose your cool, make you seem emotional or irrational. He'll probably bring up gender, imply that you made an emotional decision rather than a tactical one. Let him try. Hayes smiled. That's the spirit. Just remember, stay calm, stick to the facts, and trust the truth. That night, Sarah lay in her hotel bed, replaying the day's testimony in her mind. Armstrong's doubt, Marcus's support, the faces of the board members impossible to read. Tomorrow Torres would testify. Tomorrow she would testify. Tomorrow the truth would have its day. The nightmares came anyway, as they always did. But this time, when she relived that moment, the missile strike, the impossible choice, the decision to stay, she felt something different. Not regret. Pride. She'd made the right choice. Whatever happened in this hearing, whatever Patterson and his allies tried to do, she knew in her bones that she'd done exactly what a military officer was supposed to do. She'd completed the mission. She'd brought her people home. And no hearing, no investigation, no amount of bureaucratic second-guessing could change that. The second day of the hearing began with Washington's typical winter weather, cold rain drumming against the Pentagon's windows, the sky a uniform gray. Sarah arrived early, wanting time to compose herself before the room filled with people and cameras and judgment. Colonel Hayes was already there, reviewing notes at the defense table. She looked up when Sarah entered. How did you sleep? About how you'd expect. Fair enough. Today's going to be intense. Torres will go first. I want the board to hear from someone whose life you saved before they hear you defend your actions. Then we'll have 2 more character witnesses, and then you'll testify. Patterson will cross-examine you, and it won't be pleasant. I understand. Do you? Hayes set down her notes and looked at Sarah seriously. When I say it won't be pleasant, I mean he's going to try to break you. He's going to question your competence, your judgment, maybe even your mental state. He's going to take the worst day of your life and pick it apart in front of everyone. Sarah met her eyes. Colonel, I've survived combat. I've survived a missile strike and crash landing. I've survived 18 months of nightmares and guilt and wondering if I made the right choice. I can survive Richard Patterson. Hayes smiled. Good, hold on to that. The hearing resumed at 900 hours sharp. General Morrison called the room to order, and Hayes stood to call the first defense witness. The defense calls Sergeant First Class Mike Torres, United States Marine Corps. Torres walked to the witness chair with parade ground precision, was sworn in and sat down. He looked nervous but determined, his wife Lisa watching from the gallery. Hayes began gently. Sergeant Torres, can you tell us about the events of July 17, 2023? Torres took a breath. Yes, ma'am. My unit was conducting a security patrol in the Korangal Valley when we were ambushed by Taliban fighters. We were pinned down in a kill zone with no cover and no good way out. We called for air support and Major Chen responded. What was the situation on the ground? Ma'am, we were taking heavy casualties. 3 men wounded in the first 2 minutes. Enemy fire from 3 sides. If air support hadn't arrived when it did, we would have been overrun. And Major Chen's aircraft was hit by a missile during this engagement. Yes, ma'am, we saw it from the ground. The explosion, the smoke, we thought she was going down. What happened next? Torres leaned forward, his voice strong now. She stayed. Instead of ejecting, instead of breaking off, she came back around and continued engaging enemy positions. She made run after run, taking fire the whole time until she'd cleared enough of the enemy that we could move our wounded and call for reinforcement. How many Marines were in your unit? 16, ma'am. And how many survived? All 16, ma'am, because of Major Chen. Hayes let that sink in before continuing. Sergeant Torres, in your professional military opinion, did Major Chen make the right decision? Objection, Patterson called out. Sergeant Torres is not qualified to evaluate aircraft procedures or pilot decision-making. I'll rephrase, Hayes said smoothly. Sergeant Torres, if Major Chen had ejected immediately after being hit, what would have happened to your unit? Torres didn't hesitate. We'd be dead, ma'am, all of us. Hayes nodded. Thank you, no further questions. Patterson stood for cross-examination. Sergeant Torres, you're grateful to Major Chen for her actions, correct? Yes, sir. And that gratitude might color your perception of whether her actions were appropriate under military regulations. I don't understand the question, sir. Let me be clearer. Just because something works out doesn't mean it was the right decision. A gambler might win at roulette, but that doesn't make gambling a sound financial strategy. Do you understand the difference? Torres' jaw tightened. Sir, with respect, combat isn't gambling, it's life and death. Major Chen assessed the situation and made the best decision possible with the information she had. That's exactly what we train officers to do. But you're not an officer, are you, Sergeant? No, sir. So perhaps you're not best positioned to evaluate officer-level decision-making. I'm positioned to know that I'm alive because of Major Chen's decision-making. I figure that counts for something. A few people in the gallery laughed, quickly stifled. General Morrison gavelled for silence. Patterson tried a few more questions but got nowhere. Torres was unshakable. When he finally stepped down, Lisa was wiping tears from her eyes, and several of the Marines in the gallery nodded their respect. The next witness was Major Rodriguez, the instructor pilot who'd conducted Sarah's proficiency check. He testified that her skills were exceptional and that she'd showed no signs of impairment or questionable judgment. Then came Master Sergeant Williams, a maintenance chief who explained the A-10's design philosophy. Built to survive damage, built to keep flying, built for pilots who wouldn't quit. The A-10 has redundant systems specifically because we expect it to take damage in combat, Williams testified. The aircraft Major Chen flew that day did exactly what it was designed to do, and she did exactly what A-10 pilots are trained to do, stay in the fight. Each witness chipped away at the Air Force's narrative. Each testimony added weight to the defense's case. By lunch recess, Hayes was cautiously optimistic. They're not landing their punches, she said over sandwiches in a nearby deli. Morrison's asking good questions from the bench, which means he's actually thinking critically about this. That's good for us. What about the other 2 board members? The colonel's hard to read. The lieutenant colonel seems sympathetic, but it's Morrison we need to convince. He's the chair. Sarah picked at her sandwich, not hungry. When do I testify? At 13:30 hours, Sarah was sworn in and took the witness chair. The room felt smaller from this angle, more exposed. She could see every face in the gallery, Marcus, Torres, and his wife, Rebecca Yates the reporter, several uniformed personnel she didn't recognize, and Dale Morrison in the front row. Hayes began with basic background questions, her service history, her training, her experience in the A-10. Sarah answered clearly and concisely, feeling herself settle into the rhythm. Major Chen, let's talk about July 17, 2023. When you first received the call for close air support, what was your assessment of the situation? Marines in contact, danger close. multiple enemy positions, critical situation requiring immediate response. And you responded. Yes, ma'am. I arrived on station approximately 8 minutes after the initial call. Walk us through what happened. Sarah took a breath, centering herself. I conducted visual reconnaissance and identified enemy positions on the eastern ridge. I cleared my first gun run with the ground controller and engaged. The 30mm rounds neutralized the heavy machine gun position that was causing the most casualties. When was your aircraft hit? During my third pass. I was engaging a mortar position on the western ridge when I took the SAM hit to my left engine. What were your immediate thoughts? I assessed the damage. The left engine was gone, fire light illuminated, but the right engine was still producing full thrust. Hydraulics were compromised but not completely failed. I had partial control authority. Did anyone order you to eject? Captain Webb called out a warning on the radio, but it wasn't a direct order. He was informing me of the situation, which I already knew. So what did you decide? I decided that the aircraft was still flyable and the ground situation was still critical. The Marines needed continued air support, and I was the only asset in immediate range. I chose to complete the mission. Hayes nodded. Take us through the rest of the engagement. Sarah described each subsequent gun run, the difficulty of controlling the damaged aircraft, the smoke in the cockpit, the warning alarms she'd had to silence to focus on flying. She described watching the Marines below, seeing them move wounded personnel, seeing them return fire with renewed energy because they knew they had air support. She described the decision to make one final pass before attempting the emergency landing, knowing her fuel was running low and her controls were degrading with each passing minute. And then I flew the aircraft to a flat area 5 miles short of base and put it down as gently as I could. The landing gear was damaged, so it was a belly landing. The aircraft broke apart on impact, but the cockpit integrity held. I sustained injuries but was able to egress under my own power. Major Chen, knowing what you know now, would you make the same decision again? Sarah looked directly at General Morrison. Yes, sir, without hesitation. Those Marines needed support and I was in a position to provide it. That's what we do. That's what the uniform means. Thank you, no further questions. Patterson stood slowly, buttoning his jacket. Sarah could see the calculation in his eyes. He was about to go for the kill. Major Chen, you said you assessed the damage to your aircraft, but you're not an engineer, are you? No, sir. You're not a maintenance technician? No, sir. So your assessment of the aircraft's airworthiness was based on what exactly? Your feelings. My assessment was based on 20 years of flying experience and 3,000 hours in the A-10. I know that aircraft better than most engineers. But you're not an engineer, Patterson repeated. You made a judgment call that cost the Air Force $25 million. I made a judgment call that saved 16 lives. Did it, or did you simply get lucky? Patterson walked closer to the witness stand. Major Chen, isn't it true that you could have ejected, called in the next available air support, and achieved the same outcome without risking yourself or the aircraft? No, sir. The next available air support was 20 minutes out. The Marines would have been overrun before it arrived. You don't know that. I know the tactical situation. I know how quickly combat evolves. I know that 20 minutes might as well be 20 hours when you're taking fire from 3 sides. Patterson smiled coldly. Let's talk about your emotional state. You'd lost several members of your squadron in the months prior to this incident, hadn't you? Hayes shot to her feet. Objection, relevance. I'm establishing the witness's mental state, Patterson said. It goes to judgment. General Morrison considered. I'll allow it, but keep it focused, Colonel Patterson. Patterson turned back to Sarah. 7 members of your squadron had been killed in various incidents in the 6 months before July 17th. Isn't that correct? Yes, sir. And you'd attended their memorial services? Yes, sir. Isn't it possible that your judgment was affected by grief, by a desire to prove something, by survivor's guilt manifesting as reckless behavior? Sarah felt anger flash hot in her chest but kept her voice level. No, sir. My judgment was affected by the tactical situation in front of me and nothing else. But you were experiencing survivor's guilt, weren't you? I don't see how that's. Just answer the question, Major. Sarah looked at him steadily. I was experiencing what every combat veteran experiences when their friends die. Yes, I felt loss. Yes, I felt grief. But I compartmentalized those feelings when I was in the cockpit because that's what professionals do. My decision that day was tactical, not emotional. Patterson circled the witness stand. Let me ask you something else. You're the first woman to receive the Medal of Honor for this specific type of combat action in Afghanistan. Did that pressure affect your decision-making? Did you feel you needed to prove something about women in combat? No, sir. Really? Because it seems to me that a male pilot in the same situation might have followed procedures and ejected. But you, as a female pilot trying to prove yourself, decided to take an unnecessary risk. The room went very quiet. Sarah could feel every eye on her. She leaned forward slightly. Colonel Patterson, I didn't make that decision as a woman. I made it as a pilot, as an officer, as someone who took an oath to protect and defend. My gender had nothing to do with it, despite what you might think. What I think? You've never believed women should fly combat missions, Sarah interrupted, her voice cutting. You've testified before Congress to that effect. You've written articles arguing against it. So forgive me if I don't find your analysis of my decision-making particularly objective. Patterson's face flushed. Major Chen, you will not. General Morrison, Hayes called out, standing. I move to have Colonel Patterson's questions regarding gender stricken from the record. They're clearly biased and designed to attack Major Chen personally rather than address the facts of the case. Morrison gavelled for silence. Colonel Patterson, I'm inclined to agree. Unless you have specific evidence that Major Chen's gender affected her tactical decision-making, I suggest you move on. Patterson stood there for a moment, clearly wanting to press the point, but Morrison's expression brooked no argument. Finally, he nodded. No further questions. The hearing recessed for the day. Sarah stepped down from the witness stand feeling drained but strangely energized. She'd faced Patterson and held her ground. She'd told the truth. Whatever happened now, she'd done her part. In the hallway, Marcus pulled her into a hug. You were amazing in there. I just told the truth. You did more than that. You put Patterson in his place. He grinned. Did you see his face when you called him out? Priceless. Torres approached with his wife. Ma'am, I just want to say what you did in there took guts, standing up to that colonel, making him face his own bias. He made it easy, Sarah said. His prejudice was showing. Rebecca Yates materialized from the crowd. Major Chen, can I get a quote for tomorrow's story? Sarah hesitated, but Hayes nodded. Keep it brief. The truth is my defense, Sarah said simply. I did my job that day and I'd do it again. Nothing Colonel Patterson said changes that. Rebecca scribbled notes. Thank you, this is going to be a hell of a story. That night, Sarah sat in her hotel room with Hayes, reviewing the day's testimony. Tomorrow they'll make their closing arguments, Hayes said. Then the board deliberates. We could have a decision as early as tomorrow afternoon. What are our chances? Honestly, I think we've got this. Morrison's smart enough to see through Patterson's bias. The testimony from Torres and the others was powerful. And you, Sarah, you did exactly what you needed to do. You showed them you're not intimidated, you're not apologetic, and you know exactly why you made the right call. But, Hayes smiled. No buts, I think we're going to win this. Sarah wanted to believe it, but she'd learned not to trust optimism. The military was a big machine, and individuals got crushed in its gears all the time. Get some rest, Hayes said, standing. Tomorrow's the final round. After Hayes left, Sarah stood at the window, looking out at the lights of Washington, D.C. somewhere out there. Patterson was probably preparing his closing argument, sharpening his final attacks. But Sarah wasn't afraid anymore. She'd faced her past in that hearing room. She defended her choices. She'd stood up for every woman who'd follow in her footsteps. Whatever happened tomorrow, she'd done what needed to be done. She thought about the A-10, that stubborn aircraft that refused to die, that kept flying when it should have fallen, that whispered, even in its last moments, I'm still here. Sarah smiled slightly. Yeah, she was still here too. And she wasn't going anywhere. The final day of the hearing began with an unexpected development. As Sarah and Hayes entered the conference room, they found General Morrison standing by the window, looking troubled. He turned when they entered. Colonel Hayes, Major Chen, we have a situation. Sarah's stomach dropped, sir. Dale Morrison passed away last night. Heart attack. He was my uncle, probably more like a father, really. He raised me after my dad died. The general's voice was steady but tight with emotion. The board agrees to postpone the hearing if you'd like time to. No, sir, Sarah said immediately. I'm sorry for your loss, but Mr. Morrison would want us to finish this. General Morrison studied her for a long moment. You knew my uncle. I met him a few times in Creekside. He was at the memorial dedication where I spoke. He was a good man. He was, Morrison nodded slowly. And you're right, he'd want us to finish this. He believed in doing your duty no matter what. He paused. He called me last week, after he watched your testimony online, said I better not let politics get in the way of justice, said you reminded him of his grandson Danny. Sarah felt her throat tighten. Danny died serving his country, sir. Your uncle was proud of him. He was proud of all service members. Took him a while to understand that included women, but he got there in the end. Morrison straightened. Let's proceed with the hearing. The room filled quickly. Sarah noticed Lisa Torres sitting alone. Apparently Mike had been called back to base, and Rebecca Yates with her notepad ready. Marcus was there, as were several other pilots from Sarah's squadron who'd flown in to support her. And in Dale Morrison's empty seat, someone had placed a small American flag. General Morrison gavelled the hearing to order. We'll proceed with closing arguments, Colonel Patterson. Patterson stood, his expression serious. General Morrison, members of the board, this case is about one simple question. Do we trust our regulations, or do we trust individual judgment over established procedures? He walked to the center of the room. Major Chen made a decision in the heat of combat. That decision happened to work out. But military operations cannot be based on luck or individual heroics. They must be based on discipline, on following procedures, on predictable and reliable responses to crisis situations. If we validate Major Chen's actions, we send a message to every pilot in the Air Force. It's acceptable to ignore safety protocols if you think you know better. We tell them it's fine to risk expensive equipment and their own lives based on split-second judgments that may be clouded by emotion, stress, or fatigue. He turned to face Sarah directly. Major Chen is undoubtedly brave. Her service record is exemplary, but bravery without discipline is not military virtue, it's recklessness. And recklessness, no matter how well-intentioned, cannot be rewarded. Patterson sat down and Sarah felt the weight of his words. He'd made it sound so reasonable, so logical. As if following rules was always the right answer, regardless of circumstances. Hayes stood. She was silent for a moment, letting the room settle. Colonel Patterson wants you to believe this is about regulations versus judgment. But that's a false choice. Regulations exist to guide judgment, not replace it. Every military manual, every training program, every doctrine document includes language about adapting to circumstances. Because war is chaos, and rigid adherence to rules gets people killed. She walked to the witness stand, placing her hand on the chair where Sarah had testified. Major Chen did not ignore safety protocols. She assessed them in context. She evaluated her aircraft's capabilities, the tactical situation, and the lives at stake. She made an informed decision based on her training, her experience, and her professional judgment. That is exactly what we expect officers to do. Hayes turned to face the board. But Colonel Patterson is right about one thing. This case does send a message. The question is, what message do we want to send? Do we want to tell future officers that following procedures is more important than accomplishing the mission? Do we want to tell them that we don't trust their judgment under fire? Do we want to tell our female officers that they'll be held to a different standard, questioned more harshly, doubted more readily than their male counterparts? She paused, letting that sink in. Or do we want to send a different message, that we trust the officers we've trained, that we value mission accomplishment, that we judge actions by their merit, not by the gender of the person who took them? Hayes moved to stand behind Sarah. 16 Marines went home because Major Chen refused to quit. 7 members of her squadron didn't come home from other missions. She lives with that guilt every day. And now we're going to question whether saving those 16 lives was worth a damaged aircraft. This board has a choice. You can punish competence and courage because they don't fit neatly into regulations. Or you can recognize that Major Chen did exactly what we ask our warriors to do. She completed the mission. She brought her people home. She honored her oath. Hayes's voice dropped, became more intimate. General Morrison, you lost your uncle last night, a man who served his country, who raised you to value duty and honor. What message would he want you to send today? She returned to her seat. The room was silent. General Morrison called a 30-minute recess for the board to deliberate. Sarah waited in the hallway with Hayes and Marcus, too nervous to sit. "I think we've got this," Hayes said quietly. "Morrison's expression when you mentioned his uncle, that was significant." "Or it makes him want to be extra careful to appear impartial," Sarah countered. "Either way, you did everything right. Now we wait." The 30 minutes felt like 30 hours. Sarah paced the hallway, drank bad coffee from the machine, tried not to think about what failure would mean. Finally, a bailiff appeared. "The board is ready." They filed back into the room. General Morrison's expression was unreadable, a perfect military mask. Sarah's heart was pounding. Everyone rose as the board entered. Morrison gavelled them to order. "After careful consideration of all testimony and evidence, this board has reached its decision." He looked directly at Sarah. "Major Sarah Chen, you are hereby cleared of all charges. This board finds that your actions on July 17, 2023, were consistent with military judgment and operational necessity. No violation of Article 92 occurred." Sarah felt her knees go weak. Hayes gripped her arm, steadying her. Morrison continued. "Furthermore, this board finds that your actions exemplify the highest traditions of military service. You demonstrated courage, competence, and sound tactical judgment under the most difficult circumstances imaginable. The Medal of Honor you received was earned and deserved." He paused, his voice becoming less formal. "Major Chen, my Uncle Dale called me before he died. He told me about meeting you, about your speech at the memorial. He said you changed his mind about women in combat. He said if Danny were still alive, he'd want to serve with someone like you." Morrison's voice cracked slightly. "That's the highest compliment my uncle could give, and I agree with him. This hearing is concluded. Major Chen, thank you for your service, and thank you for reminding us what that service really means." The gavel came down. The room erupted, people standing, applauding. Marcus lifted Sarah in a bear hug. Hayes was wiping her eyes. Reporters rushed toward them with cameras and microphones. Sarah saw Patterson gathering his papers, his face tight and expressionless. For a moment, she almost felt sorry for him. Then she remembered all the doubt, all the obstacles, all the women who'd been told they weren't good enough. No sympathy. He'd gotten what he deserved, a public reminder that prejudice and procedure don't trump merit. Outside the Pentagon, the rain had stopped and thin winter sunlight was breaking through the clouds. Sarah stood on the steps with Hayes, Marcus, and a crowd of reporters. Rebecca Yates was first with her microphone. "Major Chen, how does it feel to be vindicated?" "It feels like justice," Sarah said simply. "But more importantly, it feels like progress. This decision sends a message to every service member. We judge you by your competence and your character, not by demographics." "Will you return to active flying status?" "Yes, I've been cleared medically, and I'm ready to serve." "Do you have any message for young women considering military service?" Sarah looked directly at the camera. "Yes, you belong, you're capable, you're needed. Don't let anyone tell you otherwise, and when you face doubts, and you will face doubts, remember that your worth isn't determined by other people's expectations. It's determined by your actions, your dedication, and your willingness to serve something larger than yourself." Another reporter called out, "Major Chen, what about Colonel Patterson? Do you think he should face consequences for his biased investigation?" Sarah hesitated. Hayes gave her a look that said, "Be careful." "Colonel Patterson is a decorated officer with decades of service," Sarah said carefully. "I disagree with his views on women in combat, but I respect his service. My hope is that this case will help him and others like him understand that the military is strongest when it includes everyone who's qualified and willing to serve." It was the diplomatic answer, the right answer. But privately, Sarah hoped Patterson was watching this moment, understanding that his era was ending. That evening, Sarah, Hayes, and Marcus had dinner at a quiet restaurant in Georgetown. The adrenaline was wearing off, replaced by exhaustion and relief. "What's next for you?" Hayes asked. "Back to Luke AFB," Sarah said. "I need to complete my flight recertification, then I'll request a new assignment." "You could teach," Marcus suggested. "Pass on your knowledge to the next generation." Maybe I'll request combat deployment. I'm not ready to be done flying missions. Hayes smiled. Whatever you choose, you've made a difference. This case is going to be taught at service academies. It's going to be cited in doctrine manuals. You've changed the conversation. That wasn't my goal. I know, but that's why it matters. Hayes raised her glass. To Major Sarah Chen, who reminded us all what courage really looks like. They clinked glasses, and Sarah felt something she hadn't felt in a long time. Peace. Not the absence of nightmares, those would probably never completely go away, but a sense that she'd done what needed to be done, that she'd stood up, fought back, and won. A week later, Sarah was back in Creekside, packing her things. The town had followed the hearing closely, and several people stopped by to congratulate her. Betty from the diner brought over a casserole and a hug. Earl and Tom came by to shake her hand and apologize for ever doubting her. "We were fools," Earl said simply. "Stuck in old ways of thinking. Thank you for showing us better." Sarah packed her few belongings into the truck. She'd missed this little house, this quiet town. But it was time to move on, time to get back to work. As she was loading the last box, a FedEx truck pulled up. The driver handed her an envelope marked urgent. Inside was a letter on official Air Force letterhead, signed by General Martinez. "Major Chen, congratulations on your vindication. I never doubted the outcome, though I know the process was difficult. You've made the Air Force better, and more importantly, you've made it fairer. I'm writing to offer you a position as Chief Instructor Pilot at the A-10 Training Squadron at Davis-Monthan AFB. It's a job that requires exceptional skill, leadership, and the ability to inspire the next generation of Warthog pilots. I can't think of anyone more qualified. If you're interested, the position is yours. Respectfully, General Robert Martinez." Sarah read the letter twice. Chief Instructor Pilot, training the next generation, passing on everything she'd learned, everything she'd survived. It felt right. She pulled out her phone and called Martinez. "General, it's Major Chen. I'm accepting the position. Excellent. Report for duty on January 15th. And Sarah, make them as good as you are." "I'll try, sir." 3 months later, Sarah stood on the flight line at Davis-Monthan Air Force Base, watching her first class of student pilots walk toward their aircraft. 6 of them, 4 men, 2 women, all nervous, all eager, all ready to learn. She'd spent the morning briefing them on the A-10's capabilities, its quirks, its stubborn refusal to die. She'd told them about redundant systems and survivability and the importance of staying calm under pressure. And she'd told them about July 17, 2023, not to glorify it, but to teach the lesson. Sometimes the right choice doesn't look like the right choice. Sometimes courage means staying when procedure says go. Sometimes you have to trust yourself. Remember, she told them, regulations guide you, but they don't think for you. Your job is to assess each situation on its merits and make the best decision you can with the information you have. That's what officers do. That's what pilots do. One of the female students, Lieutenant Maria Rodriguez, raised her hand. "Major Chen, do you think being a woman makes this job harder?" Sarah considered the question. "Yes and no. It's harder because people will doubt you more readily. They'll question your judgment more quickly. They'll hold you to higher standards while claiming they're treating you the same. But it's also easier in one way. You know exactly what you're fighting for. You're not just flying missions. You're proving that merit matters more than prejudice. That's powerful motivati."